Are you a high performer who struggles to turn your brain off when you're not working? Maybe you have a coping mechanism like doom scrolling, video games, drinking, or lighting one up. In this episode of the Examine Life podcast, I'm joined by Tara Schuster, a former executive at Comedy Central and 2 times best-selling author who is very reliant on consuming cannabis to de-stress. You'll learn how she stopped using substances as a coping strategy, how she healed herself using IFS therapy, and a DIY approach to get in touch with your own emotions to eliminate the need to cope, period. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Examine Life podcast, where we deconstruct some of life's thorniest questions in a pragmatic and philosophical way. Today's question is a good one. Is weed bad for you? And to help me answer this very scientific question, I have my friend Tara Schuster here. How's it going?
Well, first off, I'm such a scientist, and I'm doing so well, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're like, I'm not saying you are, but it's like, it would be like a weed. I'm thinking of like Wiz Khalifa or something. We're like, who's like a scientist of weed? I'm like, Wiz
Yeah,
Khalifa for sure.
yeah,
Would be.
absolutely. I'm qualified in that way.
That's good because I'm not that qualified. So we're gonna have a great conversation about weed, about numbing. I
Yeah,
think is really what is exciting here. But I'm going to do just like a quick intro of you, Tara, and then have you react to it. But basically, Tara is a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine from LA, and she's just a total effing badass. And Tara worked on some incredible shows with Comedy Central, Key and Peele, and Dana. No, not
David Spade's
David
show on the
Spade.
network, Lights Out with
David
David Spade.
David Spade, and had a moment of sorts, which we're not going to talk about in this podcast, but had a moment where it might sound familiar. She's like, "Am I going to do this the rest of my life?" And hit the eject button from corporate high status Hollywood. I was just by her offices the other day at a concert. I'm like, man, this is where it happens.
Yeah,
And went on to write 2 best-selling books, Buy Yourself the Effin' Lilies and Glow in the Effin' Dark. And I'm excited that I make an appearance in one of those. You have to go buy both to figure out which one. And Tara continues. She's just, if you follow any of her work on Instagram, in her newsletter, she's just embodies this profundity. I don't know if that's a word, a profoundness, a warmth, a care, a hilarious, like the some of the best wit I've ever experienced, and just people adore her. And you'll see after this episode why. How'd I
wow. I mean, I'd date me. That sounds
do?
sounds great.
Well, we could. That was another episode for discussion on dating. Another topic I know very little about. But did I miss anything? Anything that you're excited about in your
No,
journey right now?
I mean, you covered the bases. I think it's an interesting moment that, we've both talked about when you like leave the corporate world and the security and find a different kind of security in like
Mm,
peace.
mm.
And
Yeah.
like good feelings and not constantly anxious about what your boss is going to say. So it's the thing that strikes me is just that we have been on a similar journey as well.
Yeah. No, and it's been awesome to watch you, and I'm really glad that our listeners will get to learn more about you. So, all right, before we start into the question of is weed bad for you, really quick, if you are listening to this podcast and would love to debate questions like is weed bad for you with ambitious-driven professionals who might have a problem with needing to numb themselves, check out radreads.co/coaching. We run cohorts, group coaching cohorts. So with that, is weed bad for you? Let's each talk about our weed experience, our connaissance of weed, and I'll have you go first.
Yeah. So is weed bad for you? For me, weed is terrible for me. And I do think it's a very personal kind of question, although I'll get to what I have a lot of thoughts. But basically, I grew up in like a mess wreck disaster childhood, like minimally parented, neglected, psychologically abused, terrible. And for those fun details, read my first book, Buy Yourself to Fucking Lilies. So I used weed starting at the age of 15 to numb out, to dissociate myself from my feelings, to create a smoke screen between me and reality so that I could just move forward. So that I was in an unsafe house, like a literally shaky foundation. These new pylons must be erected. The coyote has eaten the cat. Like constant, just unsafe conditions. It was an open construction site for many years. My parents weren't psychologically safe. They're constantly telling me like, you're going to be raped and murdered, and not doing anything to protect for my safety. In fact, the first time I ever realized that a parent should actually care about their kid's safety, I was like 30 and I was in Zion National Park overhearing a father talking to his kids, and he was telling the kids like, we're going to go canyoneering tomorrow. And I've never tried it, but I've hired a guide. So even if it's scary, don't worry, you're safe. And I was like, wait, what? What? Parents talk about safety and make arrangements so that their kids actually are safe? Are you kidding me? It like blew my mind. Is really one of the strongest memories I ever have of my whole life, because it was just like, whoa, the world's different, like 180 different than how I thought it was. So for me, weed was the way to dampen, numb, just X out everything that was not external achievement. And so by being able to do that, I, took every single AP in my high school. I did every single extracurricular. I hustled. I got to Brown, I like made it to an Ivy League school. And it was a big part of it was weed helped me. Like,
Wow.
I don't know that I would have been able to do all that without weed numbing me out, and making life bearable and like allowing me to sleep. But I reached an inflection point where then I couldn't live without weed,
Ooh.
and where it became part of my personality, basically.
All right. Let's pause there. My weed origin story is so boring. But I'll tell it after. I have some questions though. So you're 15. You're more than a touch younger than me. You definitely have a different generational cohort. But so when you're 15, are you like, how does one buy weed as a 15-year-old in Brentwood?
Well, what one does is they steals it from their dad's closet,
Oh.
because my dad was addicted to weed. And
Oh.
basically he was always high. And so I was always scared, right? So I lived in a state of perpetual unsafety. And I thought, oh, my dad's going to die. Oh, robbers are going to come. Like I was high level. I don't feel safe all of the time.
Wow.
And so when my dad would smoke
So your
weed,
dad was like, he had like a good job and like
he was never really clear to me. He was a lawyer and he owned a restaurant and he was kind of an entrepreneur, but I don't think he ever had a passion. So, I was always like fed, but there wasn't any abundance. He was really worried about finances like all
Got
of
it.
the time. So there's a lot of like worry and anxiety. And so he obviously was using weed to numb his own worry and anxiety, which only created more anxiety in me because it doesn't feel good to have a parent who's never sober, who, it feels like I am unlovable. Like this person can't be sober around me. Therefore, there must be something wrong with me. And also I was already living in such a state of fear that I thought, oh, well, if my dad gets too fucked up, like who's going to protect me from these robbers, rapists, murderers that I've been promised are like out to get me. So I actually asked him, like, I don't care if you smoke weed, but could you just not do it in the house? Because it makes me really uncomfortable.
You asked him this as a 15-year-old.
As a 15-year-old. And he said, don't make me choose between you and weed.
Oh my God.
And from that moment on, It was a very pivotal moment. I remember walking into the laundry room and then I was just like, I'm gonna start smoking weed. Like I can't stand my life. Like I couldn't bear
Mm,
it. And so I would steal it. You know, he obviously had like the high grade stuff because he was an
mm,
adult of some means. So I became sort of weirdly, I never sold drugs, like I never did anything like that, but everybody knew I had the best stuff, you know?
mm.
So I wasn't necessarily, I don't think I like ever bought weed actually in high school. I just stole it.
Do you think he knew?
I don't know. I really
You
don't
never
know.
asked him?
We've only talked. My dad and I have a great relationship today, despite everything you just heard. And that's one of the issues we've never discussed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's still
Does
like
your
on the
dad listen
docket.
to does he read your books and listen to your
Yeah,
podcast? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
I
he
mean,
knows, he's heard versions of the story you've just described.
yeah, multiple times. I mean, he actually had, when you write a memoir, you go through legal review and somebody has to
Oh,
vouch for
fact
everything.
check.
So he's my fact check.
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
my God. So they like some 22-year-old assistant editor was like, Mr. Schuster, did you say to your daughter,
How
do
about
you?
the head of legal at Random House?
Oh, wow.
Who like
Fuck.
did the like their when they tried to merge. I won't name the lawyer, but or
Yeah.
when they tried to buy Simon and Schuster. Yeah, I'd like the top legal executive grilling me and then getting like different declarations from my dad. They take it really seriously, as they should.
Yeah. Probably especially in situations like this where it's like libel if it's wrong and things like
Yeah.
that. Like you knew your dad was stoned?
Oh
Like
yeah.
I don't think I would, as I was a very, like, I kind of like the opposite for me in terms of being 15. Like, everything was shielded from me. So it's like I didn't know anything. Right. And so I don't think I would even be able, I can't even remember my parents being drunk. And they're not big drinkers, but I know that they were. I've been a parent long enough to know that in 18 years, they were definitely drunk around us at some point. And I wonder, like, did you just, is it so obvious? Like, is it obvious? Because
Yes.
now I walk around and like, I have no idea if this person I'm talking to is stoned or
It's
not.
extremely obvious.
Yeah.
So for me, I guess it's like if you've I'm trying to think of like a good metaphor, like if you've like seen past the matrix, then it's
Oh, yeah.
like very clear to you. First off, the smell of weed is quite pungent.
Oh, yeah. And
So
this was pre-edibles,
yeah.
pre-vaping.
So you're just like, okay, there's a skunk here.
Yeah.
He's high. But only high people insist to you night after night that Moulin Rouge is the best movie that man has ever created. You know, like you're like, uh-huh, like, yeah, I get it. You love Moulin Rouge. Cool. Can I go to sleep now? Um,
Wow.
yeah, you know, it's the way people talk to you, the way they think they're so interesting. As someone who just smoked so much weed,
Yeah.
it's very, very apparent to me when people are high.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you're 15, you're stealing your dad's weed. And so when and where is like wake and bake or like
Wi-
Friday nights or during
Nighttime
school?
to go to
Nighttime?
bed. So
Okay.
basically, I had severe anxiety and depression, but not diagnosed, and I didn't have access to any mental health resources. So
No therapy. I mean, this
no
was
therapy. I
pre-therapy.
begged. Well, I
Oh,
begged, but I mean, my dad today would say that's probably one of his biggest regrets that I like
mm,
had a mom who's like truly mentally unwell going through this horrible childhood and I'm begging for like help and they can afford it and they just said no.
ah,
So weed really was my therapist. It was the only like because I didn't work out. I didn't know any self-care habits. I ate horribly. I was a theater kid. I had no tools for my mental health and I didn't even think it was important. So, and I was being told it wasn't important. Like literally every time I asked for help, it was just a straight up no.
mm,
And so weed really, it was like a blunt instrument for everything. So in order to sleep, in
wow.
order to not feel anxious, I would just get high in my bedroom late at night or meet up. And also there were a couple other kids like me and we'd meet up late at night too, but we were also A students. So
Mm,
I like had this persona of like the artsy A+ student who's also a secret
Mm,
stoner.
mm,
And I definitely got a lot of pride out of that, that like, "Ooh, how cool am I? Like, I can have it both ways." But your personality being based on a substance abuse problem is
mm.
not super cool. Like, it's
Ooh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, when it's time to stop.
Long term, not a great
Uh,
idea.
I know. We may talk. My listeners have heard enough about my alcohol stories, but a lot of my identity has been around alcohol and just like the life of the party, stupid stuff. Like, and I even joke, my brother-in-law calls my recipe of margaritas the Kegurita, and so it's like literally it's like my identity has been turned into. I write blog posts about it, but we'll come back to the identity piece. So you're a high functioning straight A student. You make it to Brown. Any other like did any bad stuff happen to you in high school that was related to weed? Like directly related to weed? Like
No, I was very lucky because I will say to you now, like, I drove high constantly. Like, I live in
uh
Los Angeles, and weed, you know, I'm all for, like, I don't really want to get into a debate about decriminalization and all
yeah.
these things, right? But what I will say is it wasn't talked about that, like, being high while driving is probably a bad idea. What people would more say is like, well, don't drink and drive, but weed is different. Weed's
Um,
okay. And it's totally not. And I'm like the luckiest person ever that I never hurt anyone, that I never got in an
uh,
accident. I truly, God was watching out for me on that one. But no,
yeah.
there were no like consequences other than I didn't know my personality, wasn't
Mhm.
coping with anything, and was starting to get physically ill from weed. Those were the
Got it.
consequences.
Okay. So no like first order consequences
Uh-uh.
from if anything it was I suspect that I mean I felt this with drinking is that because I'm such a high performer, people would give me a pass.
Oh
Like
yeah.
they would like see me like pound drinks and they'd be like, "Oh, like whatever. Like
What was
this guy's
cool?
like wakes up at like 5 in the morning to exercise. He's fine." Like and
And I would say, like, probably more than fine, right? A defining cool characteristic.
yeah, celebrated. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
I was
whoa.
"Whoa, she's, like, so high, but she's gonna go, like, ace the SATs tomorrow. Whoa." Like, it was to be
That's at
right?
44, I'm gonna say that's still badass. I was fucking nervous Nelly before the SATs, which 1590, so I did ace them. But when did let's call it like first order? It's like the weed directly. Let's second order being like not knowing yourself, not
Yeah.
being able to cope. First order, like something bad happens as a result of smoking weed.
Yeah,
Um,
so it was about when I was 25. So I would
okay.
say I was, like, straight up addicted for 10 years, and for people like, "You can't be addicted." Just Google, "Can you be addicted to weed?" The first Harvard Medical School search result, yes, you definitely can.
Is that like some weird psyops thing? Because I was gonna say, like, right as you said that, I was gonna ask, I'm like, can you be addicted to weed?
Well, it's like it's one of those funny things where I think the reason that it comes up so often is there's so many weed apologists, and as I
Mm,
say this, if your blood is beginning to boil because I'm threatening weed, just chill for like 1 second because I wanted weed to work. Like, I really wanted weed to be the answer to all of my issues. But yes, you can become like technically addicted to weed and in a certain, especially a certain population of people. And
mhm,
it can have actual, like, for the developing brain, for like my age group, terrible, terrible,
like
terrible.
15,
Yeah,
15
like
to 25.
you shouldn't be smoking. You shouldn't be smoking the amount that I was smoking. And so about when I was 25, I started getting really sick.
Tell
So
us the amount. Like, I mean, I don't even know
like
how you measure amounts, like
perma
joints or.
high, just always smoking weed. I've like wasted a big part of my brown. That would actually be first order. I wasted a large part of my insanely expensive bought on credit education being high.
Just being high like all day.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest regrets. Because
And going to class high.
I
Did you have
didn't go
like
to
a
class high. It was after class at night, anytime that
mm,
wasn't class. So it was sort of like in a haze, you
yeah.
know?
Oh wow. So just like a
Yeah.
hazy stone
Hazy.
college experience, which is
They
I think that's a
Yeah.
case for a lot of people with booze. It's just like if you're not in
Yes.
class, you're drinking in college. But
Yeah.
okay.
But it began to have actual physical effects.
Okay.
Like I developed acid reflux
Okay.
because the smoke, I wasn't edibles, I was smoking. So it opens your esophagus, right? So
Uh,
all of a sudden I have horrible acid reflux. So I'm taking Prilosec. Then I'm paranoid all of the time.
mm,
None of the fun things about weed, none of the joy, none of the laughing. I just feel crazy sick all the time, but because I'm addicted, I have to keep smoking. So then I
mm.
get sicker. So then I have to keep smoking to try to like dampen my feelings of sickness. And it just became like a monster. I just felt ill all of the time. That was sort
And
of a real turning point.
and are you drinking at the same time?
Oh
Or
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm
Hell yeah.
binge drinking, so that's good. But that somehow, and even recently I realized like, wow, I was throwing up all of the time from drinking, and it never occurred to me, hey man, maybe drink a little less.
Wow.
Like maybe throwing up at every party isn't
Mm.
like cool. I mean, I was out of control with like substances, and yet
Eh,
going to Brown and all these
yeah.
things.
And I mean, I can say this to you as my friend. I'm like, you sound like the life of the party. I was like,
Well, I did go to a wedding this weekend where I was voted most fun. Uh, that was without the help of weed, but was with a lot of alcohol.
got
But
it.
yeah, like that was my whole vibe. Was I was like
Mm-hmm.
super duper fun, but then studious and like getting ahead, you know?
Maybe that's why we're friends.
We both have that in us.
We
It's true.
really both have that very, very much in that. And okay, so so you start to get physical elements. What happens next?
So now I'm on
And
prescriptions.
obviously you're 25, so you're
Yeah.
performing your Comedy Central career
So
or
I've
your
just I've like began at comedy. I started the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And from there I was climbing the ranks within Comedy Central. So this is early in my career, but I'm already like speeding. Like, yeah, I started as a production assistant, but I already know the president and I'm already, doing informationals with the head of ad sales. Like I'm already
Mhm.
moving really, really fast. And I basically had a very dark night of the soul where it was my 25th birthday. I was drunk and I was high. And I woke up the next morning to all these voicemails from my therapist. And I'm like, wait, why the fuck is she calling me on like my birthday celebration night? That is so weird. And as I listened to her voicemails, I realized I had threatened to kill myself. And she had taken the threat so seriously that she was trying to find me. And it was that morning where all of this wasn't funny anymore. Because to me, it was funny. Like, oh, I have this dual personality, whatever, it's fine. And that was the first time where I got scared. Like, hearing how scared she was a big, oh, fuck, there's something I should be scared of. If I don't save my life, I'm not going to have much more of a life to live. And that, like, it was the, wow, now I take Prilosec for weed and the I can't enjoy anything. I'm just paranoid. And then the wow, cool. So I'm at the point where I'm like threatening suicide at night and like people are trying to find me. Like something's got to
And you don't
give.
even know, you don't even
Don't even
remember.
remember. Don't even
Was that
remember.
the first time you had
No.
had
By the
suicidal
way,
thoughts?
no. And by the way, this isn't in either of my books. And the story I just told is page 1 of my first book,
Yeah.
is that drunk dial. But what's not in the book is that it had happened before, and I had
Mm.
completely blocked it out. It was 2 years before I had had a very similar situation that I just like amnesia'd that it never happened. And so afterwards, when I was working on it in therapy, it was like, oh shit, man, but you did this before? I mean, that's how
Different
out of
therapist.
same therapist.
Oh.
And so it was just like, oh, I'm so out of control. Like,
Hmm.
which was scary, you know? And I didn't have parents to talk to about it. I was very much on my own. I didn't have a safety net. I was a PA at Comedy Central. Like, I had
Uh-huh.
my brain, to like get me through and get me promotions. But that was a real loneliness and dark night of the soul when I realized, okay, weed, booze, pushing this all down, it's going to
Uh-huh.
kill me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So where did you go? How did you take this newfound information?
Yeah.
How did your behavior change?
Well, because like you, I can't stop working. I just that morning I was like, I got to treat this like a work project. I got to be my own parent. I do not. It is time to just face reality. I never had parents, biological
Mm.
people who birthed me. Sure, anybody who nurtured, protected, taught me values, taught me anything. No, I really didn't. And so I'm gonna have to step in and do that. I didn't have a mentor to turn to, so I basically just started a Google document of all the questions I had, like what are values? What are principles? What are vegetables? Like genuinely, what are they? Which one should I be eating? Still kind of unclear as like new superfoods are introduced to us like every week. A little hazy on that one.
What's the role of quinoa in my
Yeah,
life?
exactly. And at that time, it was like, and is it like toxic to different environment? It's like always something where I'm like, please, just someone tell me what to eat. I'll do
Yeah.
whatever you say. Um, but it was like, I'm gonna have to take this on like a research project. And
Hmm.
so for 5 years, I read. I didn't actually know about the genre of self help, which in retrospect would have been so helpful. And I wish someone had said, hey, there's like a whole genre that you could turn to here, right? I didn't know. And honestly, I was probably too snobby. Like if someone had suggested that, something like self-help, I'd have been like, yeah, sure. So instead I read literature and I read
Hmm.
memoirs like they were self-help books, learning from Nora Ephron or Steve Martin or the Steve Jobs book, whatever. Like trying to, and so in this Google document, talking to these figures like as if they were my parents, and like using their lessons and then just creepily observing my friends' families and like
Hmm.
taking notes like, oh, like they serve their children salmon and lentils and nobody's screaming or crying. Interesting, you know? Um, and so I did that for 5 years. At the end of
With the therapist, still
therapist,
seeing the
some of the
therapist.
time, there were pockets where I wasn't, pockets where I was.
Got it.
Um, I have
Any
it.
other like peers support, like with
I had
friends or
one friend who was into personal development who got me into journaling and a gratitude practice, which was
okay.
very important. But in Gretchen Rubin's book, The Four Tendencies, she talks
Okay.
about different personalities. And for some reason, my personality is self motivated. Like, I don't
Uh,
need anybody else to do something. Thank God.
yeah.
Because, like, this wouldn't have happened otherwise, you know?
That's wild. Do you side little transgression, do you
Yeah.
know your Enneagram type?
No, it's been, wait. Yes. Dr. Jennifer Freed told me I'm a super, super evolved 3,
Okay.
which
We're
makes me believe that she was slightly insulting me because why did she say super, super evolved? Like, why'd you qualify it so much?
yeah,
Are
that's
you that?
so I'm a 3 also. Or I've never taken the test, but I've read all the descriptions. I kind of don't like those things
Yeah.
because I think it feels like it pigeonholes you and like you start to believe
Like a
something. Anyway,
story.
yeah, you start to believe a story and like being like heavily influenced by Buddhism. I'm like everything's a story, so like you're gonna like spoon feed you a story to define yourself. I'm like that sounds like hell. But anyway, I did read it and I was like, oh my God, this is me. And so the 3, and shout out to Derek Haswell who introduced me to this, but the 3 is seeks affirmation, is the achiever, charismatic, inspires others, always pushing themselves, super self-motivated, fun to be around. People want to be like them. Um, and all of it is their greatest fear, though, is their unworthiness. And so all of it is just a giant charade
Yeah.
to just paper over the unworthiness element of it. So, but as you were talking, I mean, most of our listeners, I would guess, are threes. And I
Yeah.
think I've built a real, when I didn't realize this until after, it was like, when I write, I'm writing to a three. And that's why my writing lands so well with like this, which is like a quirky group of
That's
people,
well,
but it's like,
that's actually very interesting because even we've talked about like I'm starting a mastermind, but it's only for overachievers because those are the people that I feel like I can talk to because
exactly.
I understand what that is. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, probably
Well,
I'm writing
feel
to
their
them.
pain, and I think the evolved part that what you say is like you have transcended what I hear, and I see you as a friend is you've kind of transcended. 'Cause there's like the dark side of the three, which is who's Christian Bale, Wall Street,
Oh
right?
God.
Like a narcissistic psychopath that
Yeah.
obliterates everyone to get what's theirs.
Yeah.
And then
Doesn't
there's
that
like
seem like me? Doesn't that-
well, it's like
I'm
it's
kidding,
you
I'm
and me
kidding.
untethered,
Yeah.
right?
No.
Like
I would have done and have done to rise that quickly in a corporate environment like Viacom. You're not like everybody's favorite person.
Yeah.
Like it's not a cakewalk by any means, but I find myself now this, and not to take us on such a tangent, but unprogramming, proving myself. Like the last bastion for me is this, like, I'm realizing in certain relationships how much I'm trying to prove a point, and I can just see it. Like, I'm not always great at resisting it, but I'm definitely at the point where the main question I ask myself is, why am I acting this way? Is it because
Yeah.
I authentically want this or want to be this way in this conversation? Or is it because I'm trying to prove a point?
Yeah.
And if I'm trying to prove I'm worthy, you should like me, I'm better. Sometimes it's like I'm better than you, then I have to like sit with myself, step back. I don't want to be that kind of person. Maybe disengage from this conversation. This is something for me to handle later, but it's not a habit yet. Like it's not like instinctual that I can avoid going there. Right now I'm in the place where I can like, oh shit. Like, oh, here I am. Disengage. That's where I find myself.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned this. Like, I have this coping mechanism too, where if I ever feel threatened, and again, it's not even a real threat, it's like a perceived threat or a threat in my own head, that I tell, especially if it's another person, I'm like, oh, well, I'm better than them. And so I'll give you a very real example. There's an internet creator who's kind of like surpassing me in stature, whatever that means. And that's the really shitty side about these internet businesses is like, it's almost worse than Wall Street, because at least people on Wall Street like hide, or they like pretend to hide how much money they have.
Yeah.
Which is the scoreboard. But here on the internet, it's just all on display. It's like your money's on, it literally follows you around through the different vanity metrics.
Yeah.
So this person is kind of starting it past me. And of course, he's doing it faster than I did it. So I feel bad about myself and I'm resentful towards it. The person has no idea. He doesn't even know who I am.
Right.
And then he's also been like posting different like strength feats. So like how much he can lift.
Oh, no.
Like on it. And so he surpassed me as an internet creator, but I was way ahead of him in how much I can lift. So I'm like, okay, well, he can't lift as much as me. And like, he's younger. So I'm like, I have more money than him. But I just saw the other day that on the strength thing, he like posted an updated one and he had passed me.
How'd you feel?
Like, shit, I felt bad.
Yeah.
And it is this weird thing that like, I'm like, why do I have always to prove to other people, prove to myself that I'm better than other people? It's such a strange thing because it's all in your head too. I would never say this out loud, like, oh, I'm better. No. I would never even allude to it because it's purely emotional gymnastics in my own head.
Well, it's about our deeper feelings of unworthiness, and needing to. And one thing my therapist, I think, quite brilliantly said to me, actually, like last week, was some of this has been colonized in my brain about
Mm.
what is the image of respectability and power. Because,
Mhm.
and now a total tangent in dating, that's where it comes up for
Mhm.
me, is like, I want to find someone high status who, if you were to look at the circles of power in like a hierarchy, like they check all these boxes. Why? It's not just in my head. It's because this culture has told me over and over and over again that that's safety. That if,
Mm.
so sometimes I think we also, you and
So
I
like
did,
a successful Wall Street
yeah, like
male is safe. Is that like?
male, tall, fit,
Mm.
rich, educated, like the center
Equals
of the
safe.
circle
Yeah.
is totally safe. And like,
Mm.
even though you and I had different childhoods and I write about you in my book, in my second book, Glow in the Fucking Dark, like we both came from families where we equated wealth with safety to
Yeah.
some extent.
Totally.
And so just to cut us a break, well, that's what
Uh-huh.
America tells you. So it's not just like,
Mm.
yes, it's in our heads, right? But also there are like a huge industry and systematic reasons that we also think
Yeah.
that.
That's so. Yeah. I think about that too because we're totally getting on tangents, but I'll recenter us after this. It's like I have friends that they're not even like Fox News, hardcore, but
Yeah.
they're more right leaning. And I go to New York and they're like, "Aren't you scared you're gonna get like stabbed?" I'm like, "No, dude. Like New York is so safe." And like, but again, I'm like, oh, this story that obviously
That
there's a
you've
political
heard.
angle happening there too, but I think it evokes that like that primal, you think of like
Totally.
gated communities being like it's like playing into that safety net. So, okay, let's go back though. So a lot of this we've talked about like coping, right?
Yeah.
And so I used alcohol to cope first with work stress, but then I stopped being stressed and I actually drank more. And
Mm.
so I would drink to cope with relational, like, interpersonal stress. But, I have good relationships with most,
Yeah.
people in my life, great relationships with the people who really matter. So it's like, I don't really have like any interpersonal stuff. Um, and for me, and I wonder how you feel about this, one of the biggest things is like turning my brain off.
Mm.
And it's like turning my brain off. For me, it's very much this like achievement, like centered brain where it's like, I don't watch movies, but I want to like watch more movies. But where my mind would go is to like pick the movie that makes you more interesting to talk about, or like pick the movie. Like
Mm.
it's always like in service
Productive.
of some like, it's productive, but I think productive is an understatement. I think it pushes me towards this like ideal vision I have of myself.
Yeah.
And I think this is the dangers of having an internet like job where you can there's no end to it. Like you could just be more of
Absolutely.
this to every like people like me. And so that's my long-winded way of asking is like, do you like in this coping, I've honestly found that alcohol is the only way, which is why I like drinking more by myself
Mm.
than in social, because in social settings, like I'm just happy to see the social people.
Yeah.
But it's like when I'm by myself on a Tuesday night and just like, I didn't get enough done. I could have done more of this. What am I doing in
Yeah.
this? That's where alcohol or substance, for me, it was alcohol, would come in. Does any of this relate to like your brain wiring?
Well, at this point, so yes, at the time, for sure, I was using weed and alcohol just to completely numb out from everything. But I luckily got very afraid of drugs. Like got
Mhm.
so I quit cold turkey. I put
That day?
yes, that morning I put post-it notes all over my apartment that were just like, I'm so sorry, weed doesn't work for you. This sucks. I wish weed worked for you. It doesn't. Threw away my pipe. I put Greek yogurt all over my pipe and weed and just like smashed it so that like I couldn't use it. It's so gross.
That's
And
disgusting.
it was yeah, it was like the worst thing I could like who wants that? And like I couldn't recover it, you know? There's no way to wash out Greek yogurt
Yeah.
out of your weed. Like that sucks. And I stopped hanging out with people who smoked. I'm a very extreme person that way. If I'm like, no, it's over, it's like, no, it's over, goodbye forever. So I was lucky that I was able to walk away from weed that way. And then I got scared of drugs because of how they affected me. And so basically I haven't taken any kind of drug in 13
Since you're 20.
years. Yeah, 20 since I was 25. So I haven't smoked, I haven't done anything.
Not
and
not one.
I one time smoked maybe 7 years ago, and I projectile vomited onto a wall.
Oh,
And so
you're like,
my body
this
was
is
like, nope.
is this I wonder this this is a very unscientific thing I'm about to say, is like, wouldn't that be a sign that you weren't addicted? Because I
I don't
wonder about
know.
that myself with alcohol. It's like I just decided I'm gonna stop, and then I basically stopped.
Well, for me, not necessarily, because my life was threatened. Do you
Yeah.
know? Like
Yeah.
it was so severe. I was so
hmm
scared.
You were scared. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if scared straight works, but it did for me.
Yeah.
Like I got to a place where I was like, oh, I think I'm gonna die. So
Yeah.
for me, it was coming from like a place of urgency, desperation, and fear for my life.
Did you go to AA
I went to
or
some Narcotics Anonymous meetings.
and
Yeah. And so, but I didn't stop drinking.
Yeah.
Like and I didn't stop making bad decisions with boys, and I didn't stop hating myself. Like I did tons of other terrible coping mechanism things. It just wasn't weed. But today where I'm at, I don't find myself coping really. Like the worst thing I'll do is watch a bunch of F1 races. Like that's like I'll
That's
just
your coping.
my coping mechanism
Like Drive to
is
Survive or the
Formula One,
actual
Drive to
race?
Survive, and now I'm getting into the actual races, and I'll just like be like, "Oh my God, Lewis Hamilton, you're a god, you're so hot," and I'll just like sit there for
Lewis
hours.
Hamilton is hot.
I was Louisa Hamilton for Halloween this year.
Awesome.
So that's sort of my coping now, is just being brain dead and like watching F1, and F1 doesn't get me points with anyone. Most people are just
Yeah.
like, wait, what? So
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, so how did that off? Because I know our listeners are like, I cope hard. Some cope with work.
yeah,
Would you even say you don't cope with work? Because I know before
No.
we started recording.
not anymore.
Tell us how did you wean yourself off of needing? I feel like that's
Yeah.
one of the greatest questions posed
Yeah.
to mankind. Is like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which is maybe said differently. It's like, how do you learn to just be okay with yourself
Yeah.
at
I
any
mean,
point in time?
it took like all of the work. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I
You're
basically,
like, buy my 2 books.
yeah, I'm like, buy the 2 books, read them. That's how. But I think it really came down to, and I'm going to reduce again like 10 years of work
Yeah.
to like 2 sentences, but understanding who I actually am, like my stardust self. You know, we're all made of stardust, like, but for real, you know,
Yeah.
like the carbon in our muscles, the iron in our blood come from stars. Recognizing that, like, holy shit, I am a miracle. Like, actually, like a miracle that I'm alive. Actually, a miracle that I come from the galaxy. That is so cool and something to respect. And how do I let that energy out of me? Like, how do I lead from that place that isn't concerned with how I look or how things are going, but is concerned with shining and like illuminating things? And so having a really good sense of self. And I'd also point to there's a man, Dr. Richard Schwartz, who created internal family systems, which is a kind of therapy that basically just posits that you have all kinds of identities within yourself, and none of them are bad. Like your depressed part wants to help you in some way, but its coping mechanism is from when it was like 5. So it's, yeah, maybe it helped you then, but it can't help you now because you've outgrown it, but you're coping like you're 5. So with a lot of IFS work, I've been able to bring those parts of myself to a peace, like a greater peace. So
Yeah.
when I'm walking in the world, I often feel like I'm walking with many, like the many different pieces of me.
Parts.
Yeah. And so it's built internal safety. So that's what I would say is like the number one thing. And it's the project I think of everybody's lives is
Wow.
you're really fucked if you don't have internal safety
But
because the world's gonna be the world. It is
yeah.
not, it's only getting worse from here.
Mhm.
So having a place inside where you feel safe, where you feel content, where you're not trying to prove something, peace, like where you can
Mhm.
feel some amount of peace, even with like truly the reprehensible world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
It's the only way. So I guess if anything, probably my coping mechanism is like diving deeper into that.
Deeper. Wow. You're whoever said you're a super evolved 3 was was spot fucking on. Just to go back, so I'm loosely familiar with IFS. We're actually going to get an IFS
Oh, great.
coach on internal family systems if you're not familiar. And my understanding is that there's all these, like you said, these parts, and like one that I think about often is the perfectionist.
Mm,
And so there's this perfectionist part that is like scared of rejection, and so it's always stepping up to protect you so that you don't get rejected. But then
right.
at some point, that part is not serving you any longer, and
Yes.
you need to like find peace. I don't know the
Well,
right language with it.
so in my second book, I actually talk a lot about this and was lucky enough to get Dr. Richard Schwartz to like consult with me and look over my shit and help me make like a
Fuck yeah.
like he helped me make a worksheet for anybody because a big part of my thing is let's make these tools more accessible. Like you don't need a therapist to do internal family systems. And in fact, if you're curious and just listening, there's two books. He has a great book called No Bad Parts, which is a great overview. And then if you want to dig in, there's a book called Self Therapy by Jay Early that's fabulous. And anybody could use that today. And it's really well done. I've used it. It really, really helped me. But basically it says that there is no part in you that's out to get you. Like, so we reject, oh, I hate my perfectionist self. If I could do anything, it would be I just get over my perfectionism. It's bad, right? We like assign all this negativity when your perfectionism, if you actually talked to it like as if it were a person, somebody inside of you, you'd find out is only trying to protect you in some way and is
Yeah.
really scared for you, is like really, really worried, really, really wants you to live. And so it's like doing its absolute best. Like it's working at a 10 out of 10 to protect you. And that's why it feels so intense. And it doesn't know that you're not 5 anymore, that you're not 10 anymore, and that you actually don't need that. So what IFS says is that instead of rejecting that perfectionist part, we accept and heal that perfectionist part so it can take on another role. Because it doesn't want to do that either. It's suffering.
Yeah.
Like it feels terrible in and of itself. So it's bringing it to light, healing, and then giving it a new role to play in your life.
So I'm sure you've heard this because you and I are so similar in like our drive and just get shit done, and like, right, you have this dark night and you basically problem solve your way out of it. I can also imagine people listening to this, they're like, wait a minute, there's this imaginary part of you that's called the perfectionist that is doing this stuff. It's like it might borderline on the like, well, therapy, spiritual to
Like
absurd
woo-woo?
continuum
Yeah.
of things, which by the way, I think IFS is I don't know much about the origins of it, but it's a very well established
Yeah.
scientific or psychotherapist,
Yes.
whatever methodology.
Yes.
But like, what do you say to someone that's like, okay, and I think this is the unique seat that we sit in there. Like, people will look at you and I like, I'm a 3, I'm driven like these 2 motherfuckers.
Right.
So if they're saying that there's this perfectionist like little body in me that needs to be talked to and hugged, then I'm willing to listen. How do you get people over the hump that like, there is some surrender of sorts into this kind of next phase of
Yeah.
healing?
Yeah. I would say tap into your suffering is the easiest way. How bad do you actually feel? Like if you weren't coping and you weren't like buying stuff to make you feel better and you weren't like vying to make that extra whatever to prove that you're important, if you really sat down and asked how bad do you feel and how much of your life do you think you're missing out on and like sat with that suffering, that's self-compassion, which
Mhm.
people like. I used to think self-compassion was impossible to feel, that it was like
Mm.
so woo-woo. I mean, please, a
Mhm.
yoga teacher telling me to feel self-compassion, like seriously, go fuck
Especially in
yourself.
LA, right? It's
Oh
like
my,
some 22-year-old,
oh,
you know.
I'm like, if I was a model actress, I too would feel self-compassion, you know? But I think it's actually much, much simpler. It's just getting real. And like,
Mm.
instead of like literally sitting there and asking yourself, how bad do I feel? How much do I want things to be different? Can I feel my own pain? Because self-compassion is
Mm.
simply feeling your own pain and
Yeah.
being moved to do something about it. So step
Mhm.
one is just honesty.
Yeah.
It's just like, this shit is real. It doesn't matter if I should feel this way, shouldn't feel this way,
Yeah.
if it's woo woo or whatever, just what's reality. And then I think step two is taking like, what's one baby step of, you know, and there's so many tools out there like gratitude practice, IFS, whatever it is, just start on any
Mhm.
one of them because on any one of them, you're going to find new information. And with people like us, it's the task is not to be precious, to just be like,
Mm.
whatever, it's an adventure and it's an
Yeah.
experiment. It's like anything you would study or learn about, it's just like that. Like, okay, I'm just going to learn a little bit about this. If it's not for me, it's not for me, but it's not a big deal. This is
Yeah.
an experiment. This is playful. It really doesn't matter. Let's just start. That's
Yeah.
that's sort of how I got over myself,
Mhm.
and like the resistance.
I hear you, right? Like I'm with you. Self-compassion. Like, come on, dude. Like,
It's
uh,
impossible,
yeah.
it
I think
seems.
for me, one thing, and it's very similar. One thing that we were talking earlier before we hit record, that Lisa, my wife, is very much a feeler, and I'm a much more like a thinker. And I might just give this example because it really like, I think a lot of people listening, they're like, your feelings, not you, one's
Yeah.
feelings don't matter. The reality is the facts. Like whatever like the facts say. So I'll give you like a very, very simple example. As you'll know, my father-in-law passed away recently,
Yeah.
and he was the first parent to pass away of the four. And so now we're approaching the holidays,
Yeah.
and Lisa has these moments where she's like, it's not fair that you have two parents and I have one, right? And there's an anger. I don't know if it's like an anger or resentment. There's all the feels, especially since this is all so new. And it's like, you could intellectually, like, so my first impulse is like, well, my first impulse is because I'm always scared of my rejection and unworthiness, is like, why are you attacking?
Right, right.
Like, what did I do wrong? Right?
Yeah.
It's really like, I did something wrong
Defensive. Yeah.
because my parents are both still alive, right? Then my second impulse is like, I didn't control this. Like, this is just reality. Like, unfortunately, I have two living parents and you have one living parent now. But it doesn't matter to her. And this is what I've come to appreciate, is like, I used to just stop there and just sit in my anger and be like, why don't you see the world the way I see it?
Yeah.
Where I didn't want this to happen either. It's just, this is the reality. Whereas the thing that she is feeling at that moment is that it's not fair.
Yeah. That's the reality.
And that is the reality.
Exactly.
And I think that's something really hard. It was really, really hard for me. I don't think I really fully understood that until the past 6 months.
Yeah. I mean,
So I'm 44. Like, it took me like 43 years to figure it, to like even see what was happening, let alone then be able to meet that statement with love instead
Yeah.
of anger, like defensiveness, which was
Yeah.
how I would normally have reacted. And so I just say that because I think that like many listeners will be like, well, like the reality is that that it is that you have two parents and she has one and
Yeah.
living. And they're like, yes, that's the reality. But the reality is that she feels like it's unfair.
Yeah, I mean, in these equations, the only reality that matters is how you feel.
Yeah.
Because who cares about the facts, right?
Yeah.
Because we actually don't act that way. We don't
Yeah.
act rationally. She knows that. She
Yeah.
rationally knows that this is life. It's not even unfair. It's not fair. It's like these table stakes. People
Yeah.
die.
I'm not a
right?
bad person for
You're not a bad
for
person.
whatever side I fell
Right.
on.
And like the big mistake we make is then internalizing beliefs about ourselves about how we feel. So just
Yeah.
explaining like, so then Lisa is like, I'm just projecting, making an example. I shouldn't feel this way. Feeling this way is bad. I'm bad for feeling this way because I know intellectually that it's not that he did this to me. And yet I'm still like in this life is unfair, unjust thing. It's all those rejecting of how we actually do
Yeah.
feel instead of embracing, well, I'm angry as fuck. I feel
Yeah.
like it's kind of his fault in some way.
Yeah.
Because feelings can't really hurt us if we actually deal with them. Like if we actually sit and deal with the
Yes.
feeling, it's not going to come out and attack you and ruin your marriage. It's
Yeah.
going to bring you
Yeah.
closer if you actually deal with it. The thing that will ruin marriages and friendships and everything is saying, I shouldn't feel this way,
Yes.
pushing it away, because that is reality.
Yeah.
And that's the reality you're operating in. And that's the reality that's driving all of your behavior.
Totally. And I felt that like two ways. One is I used to say when my kids would cry, because I grew up, I'd be like, don't cry, stop
Yeah,
crying.
me too. Yeah.
And I'm just like, wait, like, no. And it took me, and like Lisa's the one who's like, no, you can't tell a kid to stop crying. That's telling them to not feel.
Exactly.
Right. And so that was one thing. And the other thing that I realized, I think it's from Tara Brach, and she has this line that I heard through Tim Ferriss, which is, what am I, you've alluded to it many times, like, what am I unwilling to feel in this moment?
Yeah.
Right. And I think for me, alcohol and coping, it was always like, for my whole adult life, I've been a drinker. And anytime there was something that I'm unwilling to feel, I would just grab a drink. So I actually literally didn't have to feel it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tell these, and please, listeners know, I'm not on a pro anti-drinking pedestal. I don't give a, I miss getting shit-faced and being an idiot and all that. So like, I used to find the anti-drinking people so patronizing.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing just what I've learned from this. The crazy thing with like when you are willing to sit through the feeling, it's not that long.
No.
And it's definitely not that bad.
Well, it loses its charge.
Yeah, it has no charge.
Because it's the resistance that makes it so horrible. It gives it, we all know that anxious, tinny vibration of, I shouldn't feel this way, push it down, push it down. That's what sucks. The feeling in and of itself is just a feeling.
Yeah.
But
it's like a wave. It just goes.
We've been so programmed, though, that feelings are good or they're bad.
Yeah.
As opposed to, these are just like natural things that all humans are programmed to feel.
Yeah.
That's all they are, that's all they are.
Yeah.
And so you can wait for it to pass. You can deal with it. You can choose. But I also do want to go on the record and say, I wish I could smoke weed. I wish I hadn't abused it to the point where it makes me physically ill. Like, I too am not on some pedestal about like, don't smoke weed. Like, I got fucked up last weekend at a wedding so on purpose. Like, went into the night telling everyone I am going to get so drunk.
Yeah.
And ahead of time canceled all of Sunday so that I could just get home. So I'm not like a paragon of health and wellness. It was fun. Probably wasn't that great for me.
And was it from a place
but I
of
loved it.
health? Like, were you approaching that from a place? Because I think about that, like I feel like I could approach even something like getting drunk from a place of being healthy, like from a healthy place. Where do you feel like you approached that from a healthy place?
I don't know, because I always wonder if you have to use a substance like at all, then like what's really going on. But I'm also like, there are so many other problems in the world. Like me having a few dirty martinis at my best friend's younger brother's wedding, I'm allowed. Just
Yeah.
like, because there's like a point at which all of this is just too much. It's just like too much self-reflection and too much seriousness.
Yeah.
So like a playfulness about like, yeah, I'm gonna get fucked up
Yeah.
and
And own it instead of like, I think that's where I've been like dilly-dallying. I'm like, I'm just gonna have one drink, and then I'm like, no, I'm gonna own it.
yeah.
I do have a wedding in December. I'm gonna own my
And
shit-facedness.
by the way, I don't like do that every weekend either.
Yeah.
It was
No.
like a night where I really was like intentional about what was gonna happen. I don't know. Maybe my therapist would be like, "Man, I don't know.
And we're like, we made it this far.
Like, what are you talking about?" But it was fun,
Yeah.
you know.
Oh man, I love this. So I know you've given our listeners some like a few steps, but in this world, because I think this last bit of the conversation around like feelings versus the reality of feelings, repressing them versus letting them move through you. If you had like one thing you want to leave them with on that, because that is actually the other side of the
Yeah.
coin of what we've been talking about, which
Right.
is alcohol and weed and the numbing and the coping. It's like, well, you don't need to cope if you do X or do Y. So if
Totally.
there's something on that you want to leave them with.
Yeah, I mean, so in my second book, I have a emotion wheel that I developed that this is the idea of affect labeling. So here's like the cheapest, easiest way you could implement this into your life today would be to sit down and ask yourself, what am I feeling? You do not have to use my emotion wheel. There are tons of free ones. Just Google emotion wheel and sit there and just literally label. Like it'll show you in the center of it, it has primary emotions. Then there's another with secondary, and then there's another, right? So you can get pretty specific. You don't have to do it perfectly, but what words here? Are you frustrated, nervous, exposed, vulnerable? Like what words? The science is undeniable that by simply writing, literally labeling the way you feel has almost immediate benefits to anxiety and depression. Your friend that you just introduced me to, Anne Lore, am I saying her name right?
Yep.
We geeked out on affect labeling, and she helped me understand a study on this, a recent study that really confirms that it's a free and easy way to feel better and to start getting in practice with how you do feel. Because for me, it was just the only ways I felt were good, bad, sad, tired, busy. That was it. I didn't understand that there was a range. And once you're aware, like, oh no, I'm actually feeling exposed. Like, even if that's all you did, amazing, 10 points, you'll feel better.
Yeah.
But then you have a choice, right? Once you're like, oh, that's how I feel, you have a choice of how you'll respond, how you'll act, what agency you'll take in your own life. But until you actually know how you feel, you're like asleep at the wheel. You don't even know what's going on. So step one, super duper easy, free if you just Google it and have a piece of paper. That's
amazing.
That's what I would say.
It doesn't get more accessible and implementable than that. Well, Tara, always a pleasure. We have to get you. There's so many sub conversations that we could have got. We didn't even talk about identity, and that wasn't the topic du jour. Thank you so much for just the way you show up, your honesty, how caring and helpful you always are. So I really appreciate you.
And thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to get to talk to you about these things.
And tell us, we'll put it all in the notes, but tell us where you want people to go find you.
Oh, yeah. Come hit me up on Instagram. It's a blast. I'm Tara Schuster on Instagram, or my newsletter where I talk about this every single week and actually have a journaling club if you want to get into this labeling and doing some of this stuff in real life, which is taraschuster.substack.com.
Awesome. And then buy the 2 books.
Oh, yeah,
buy
duh.
The Fucking Lilies.
Man, then too.
Glow in the Fucking Dark. We'll put both of those in the links.
I'm like screaming like, Google this for free. No, I guess buy my book with it in it.
Well, there you go. That shows that like you at a subconscious level care more about the listener getting the material that will help them for free than
Yeah.
padding your pockets.
Yeah,
So,
it's just like we don't need to suffer. This is from the other side. I'm like, we
yes,
don't need this level of suffering.
amazing. All right, friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.